Welcome to the Institute for Advanced Study. I'm Jennifer Gunn, and I want to make a couple of announcements before we get our program started. The first is about next week's Thursday at 4, which will be held here in this room, and this is just a little teaser because next week's program is going to be innovative, experimental, lively, and an antidote for the increasing grayness of a late Thursday afternoon. And this program is how to get to the dance floor, a salsa guide for women based on actual experiences. And our visiting speaker is, or participant, speaker is not really the right word, is it?
You're going to stop the first 20 minutes.
Okay, so we will have a speaker, and then we'll have something much more active. You'll have to come to see. Our visiting speaker is Lucy May San Pablo Burns from Asian American Studies at the University of California, Los Angeles. And her partner in crime for this event is Cindy Garcia from Theater Arts and Dance here at the University of Minnesota and a current IAS fellow. So today's event is also a little bit different, and it came about because we, at the IAS, we've been trying to think about issues that are relevant for the university, and one of them is the fact that our strategic plan has a lot to say about community-engaged scholarship, and I quote, "The university has unparalleled opportunities to advance community-engaged research and teaching that has high local and global relevance and impact, taking advantage of our location in an urban area in the global Midwest on the banks of the Mississippi River." And in fact, more specifically, we're calling for building an engagement culture, which includes engagement as part of the review of faculty members' research and teaching, to expand training in how to do engaged scholarship for faculty, staff, and students, and to expand community-engaged grand challenges. So that's kind of the motivation behind today's Thursdays at 4. And I'd like to introduce one of our co-sponsors. Today's event is being co-sponsored by the Minnesota Campus Compact and also by the Office of Public Engagement. I looked at the P and I suddenly went blank. The Office of Public Engagement, sorry. Okay, that's a real winner. So today's moderator is Julie Plout, and Julie has been the executive director of the Minnesota Campus Compact since 2009. She holds a PhD in history from Indiana University at Bloomington, and her dissertation focused on John Gardner's journey from being a psychology faculty member to being a civic leader. And she also, while she was in Indiana, she also helped establish and lead the Indiana University Center for Community Partnerships. So without further ado, I'm turning you over to Julie.
Thank you. I'm really excited to be with you all, in part as listener and facilitator of discussion. Minnesota Campus Compact, if you're not familiar with us, is a coalition of all types of colleges and universities that share a commitment to democratic engagement, and that's both thinking about how we support students in developing their commitment and capacity to contribute to the public good, but also, as we'll be focusing on today, engage research, and also another topic, sort of institutional engagement and partnerships that support justice, democracy, healthy communities, etc. As you can imagine, the work looks very different at each campus, just based on its own context and academic programs, student population, etc. And so we try and support the distinctive work with each university, and we're diving in with the University of Minnesota today with 8 scholars who are going to share briefly their work or their perspective on community-engaged scholarship, and then we will have, ideally, half an hour at the end for your questions, your comments, other examples, challenges, whatever you want to share with all of us. So the first is Andy Furco, Associate Vice President of Public Engagement, who is joining us by video, and then the other 7 are live. So he obviously won't respond to questions, but the others are very excited to engage with you.
Hello, I'm Andy Furco, Associate Vice President for Public Engagement. I'm also Associate Professor in the Department of Organizational Leadership Policy Development in the College of Education and Human Development. I oversee the Office for Public Engagement in the Provost's Office, and the Office for Public Engagement is responsible for advancing and institutionalizing all forms of public engagement across the 5 campuses of the university. Public engagement is a very particular term. It really embodies a 21st century approach to community engagement in higher education in 5 distinct ways. First of all, community engagement in the 21st century is not just about fulfilling our public service and outreach mission, but it's also about advancing our research mission of producing knowledge that benefits society, and also our teaching mission of engaging our students and faculty in educational experiences that are tied to community issues and enhance the community agenda. Secondly, public engagement is tied, in the 21st century, is tied to all aspects of our identity. People say to me, well, Andy, of course, the University of Minnesota is an engaged institution. You're a land-grant university. That's true, we are. We're also a research university. We're also a public university. Here in the Twin Cities, we're a metropolitan university. And we're an institution of higher learning. All of those identities are part of what we are as an institution. And the 21st century community engagement agenda must be tied to all parts of our identity, not just the land-grant mission. Public and community engagement in the 21st century also is about how we work with communities. Traditionally, we're the experts that go into the community and share our knowledge with communities. But this isn't about doing to communities or for communities or even in communities. A 21st century community engagement agenda is about working with community to honor the knowledge and experience and expertise that communities have, that we, in ways that we co-construct, co-develop, co-investigate, co-produce, so that together we can lift up all of the participants and all members who are a part of this endeavor, so that we can do work together that we can do singularly in ways that have greater impact. Public engagement in the 21st century is also about moving from projects to partnerships. It's not about 2, 3, 4-year projects that come and go. It's about building long-term sustainable partnerships that may have many projects associated with them, but all of those projects are working towards more collective impact and a longer-term sustained partnership with communities. And lastly, public engagement in the 21st century is about seeing community-engaged work not as a program, but as a strategy for accomplishing important institutional goals, internationalizing curriculum, doing interdisciplinary work, multicultural and diversity understanding, student retention, so many different priorities that we're trying to achieve, and community engagement can be one strategy to help us achieve what we want to do as institutions, and also as what we want to accomplish in our communities. To build an engaged university, we have to have an intentional strategic plan. This doesn't happen automatically, and here at the University of Minnesota, we've tried to do this through our 10-point plan for public engagement. The first thing on that agenda, number 1 point on that 10-point plan, is raising the scholarly value of public engagement. And this is very important. All the research suggests that to build a fully engaged, institutionalized public engagement agenda in higher education, you must have strong faculty involvement and support. In fact, faculty involvement and support are the strongest predictors for institutionalizing public engagement in higher education. And that's why focusing on faculty work, how public and community engagement is embedded in academic curriculum, how it's tied to faculty scholarly agendas, how it's tied to the research agendas, are so essential for being able to build an engaged university. Well, we're making some progress on this with our promotion tenure guidelines, which were revised in 2007, with our faculty activity reporting, with our promotion tenure committee that's looking at helping to develop some guidelines to help P&T committees evaluate community engaged scholarly portfolios. We're seeing groundswell of community engaged scholarship happening across all different departments. We're seeing it in the kinds of grant grants that are being submitted that have much more of a community engaged component. We're seeing a growing number of courses that have community engagement in them, but there's still a lot more work to do. And it's conversations like the ones we're going to have today that are going to help us achieve full institutionalization of community engagement here at the University of Minnesota and beyond. This isn't about tinkering with the system, it's about transforming it. And together we can make that happen. And many institutions are looking to places like the University of Minnesota to lead the way. And I hope that we can help in our work together to build that agenda, not just for us, but for the broader field. So thank you for this opportunity to share a few words with you. I look forward to hearing about your conversations and look forward to working with you in the coming weeks. Thank you.
When you hear the marching band practicing, it's because they're engaged in Northworth outreach.
Hi, I'm Tom Fisher. Until recently the Dean of the College of Design. I'm now the Director of the Metropolitan Design Center at the College of Design. My discipline is architecture and urban design. And what the Metropolitan Design Center does, it's basically a center that deals with a whole range of community design issues. These are just some of the covers of recent studies we've done. We look at issues such as the impact of light rail transportation on community development. We worked in Frogtown on the idea of urban agriculture and Frogtown farms. We've looked at the design of parks and strategies for reducing crime in neighborhoods. We've worked on re-envisioning public housing, engaging communities and envisioning public housing. We're also currently now working on an innovation district just east of the campus to see if there are, and think about new ways of integrating higher ed into economic development in the region. And so we see this as a fundamental way of teaching students. We have degree programs as the basis for research. We publish and talk about this work nationally, internationally. And we also see this as a way to transform our disciplines, which have in the past been very top-down, and we are very much believers in using design thinking processes to engage communities in co-creating their futures. And so these are just some images of some of the projects we do, and in addition to adults, we also work with children. We find that children are some of the most creative assets in any community, and an overlooked asset very frequently. And so we spend a lot of time listening. Frequently we're engaged at the request of a community, but we never go in thinking we know the answer. We actually really focus on asking the dumbest questions we can think of, the most kinds of obvious things, to hear from them about what is actually happening in their community, and then engaging them in creative processes so that they are participants and have ownership in the future of their communities. We also are doing quite a bit at looking at questioning what is the nature of urban settlements in the 21st century. I write quite a bit about these issues and helping communities understand that a lot of what we have done in the 20th century we can no longer afford. We, for example, can no longer afford poverty. Poverty is simply too expensive. We've been working with homelessness. A person on the street is 2 to 3 times more expensive to society than having them housed in supportive housing. And so what we spend a lot of time doing is helping people realize that we can't afford the kind of waste of human capital as well as the waste of the environment and other forms of capital that we've been engaged in the 20th century, and helping communities, again, imagine a very different future for themselves. One of the other areas of work we're engaged in right now is looking at the on-demand economy, the sharing economy, and how that is a mechanism of helping communities understand their futures differently, see everything in their community as an asset, and moving away from a deficit to an asset way of thinking about all the excess capacity that we have in students, in our communities, all of the excess bedrooms we have. It's the curious thing is we have homelessness in a society that has way too much space. And so what do we do about that? And so those are kind of the creative questions that we're asking at the center. In the minute or so I have left, let me just reflect a little bit about why I think this is so important. In the age of MOOCs, I believe that community-engaged work is actually the future of higher education. It is the main reason why somebody would come to a campus. You can't take this and turn it into an open online course. And so if universities are going to survive as places for people to come and engage in face-to-face, it is, I believe, has to be a part of being engaged in communities. I think it's also the future of tenure. Why have tenure unless you're engaged in something that's actually going to get you in some sort of controversy where somebody might want you to have you fired? I believe the only way we're going to defend tenure is to do things in the community that are challenging power. And so the idea of every tenured faculty member also being a public intellectual is a fundamental value, I believe. I think this is the future of this institution. As we all know, we're one of the few urban land grants. And so our comparative advantage as an institution is key to doing this work. And then finally, I would like to make the argument that we have so much to learn from communities about how to organize knowledge. I believe that in the 21st century, we are going to come to the realization that we have organized knowledge improperly. The world does not care about disciplines. The world is not organized by disciplines. The world is a set of ecosystems, human ecosystems, natural ecosystems, and we in higher education have got to figure out how to reorganize knowledge in an ecosystem-like way with the help of communities. So, thank you very much.
Wow. Okay. I'm going to figure this out. Did that go? Oops, wrong other direction. Okay, so who am I? My name is Lauren Martin, and I am the Director of Research at the Urban Research Outreach Engagement Center, or UROC. I'm an anthropologist by training, which means that I'm obsessed with experience, context, meaning, and culture. Okay, what is UROC? The mission of UROC is to link the university in vital public partnership to improve the quality of life, discover breakthrough solutions, and advance learning. In 2013, at UROC, we launched the Sex Trading, Trafficking, and Community Wellbeing Initiative so that we can layer a bunch of different projects that we've been doing on this topic in order to create deeper and broader impact. And in the next 4 minutes or so, I'm going to talk about our work in that area. Okay, so I've been doing community-based research on sex trading and trafficking in North Minneapolis since about 2004. These are some images from some of the projects that we've been doing over the years. In all, I've conducted about 10 distinct research projects, all with community partners, and they all build on one another. So the initial project that we did started with that poster right there with the yellow silhouette. It really developed a core of knowledge that was developed through action research in North Minneapolis with people who trade sex, probation officers, police officers, residents, and others. In that project, we engaged over 155 people who had been involved in sex trading, as well as over 400 other stakeholders in that community. All of these projects examine the experiences of sex trading within a specific context. So sometimes that context is community context, sometimes it's family context, sometimes it's institutional context, etc. They all seek to surface hidden meaning that can fuel action. And the kinds of action that we've explored are interventions, prevention, policy, and I think crucially destigmatization of the people involved and the behavior. We think of that as an action. Some of the impact that we've had, we've done some policy change in Minnesota. We've reworked probation for people on probation for prostitution. We've started a community-based drop-in space. We've raised awareness. We've done trainings, etc., etc. Okay, so how do I do engaged research? I use an action research approach, which is demonstrated in that diagram there. Basically, we engage multiple stakeholders in this cycle. So we co-design projects, then we collect data together, we analyze data together, then we act together, and in the process of doing action, new questions always arise, which then always lead to new projects. And in all of those phases, partnership is key. The focus of most of the work we do is on experience and meaning making around marginalized, hidden, and obfuscated experiences that tend to be elided by our broader social narratives and discourses. Everything we do is rooted in an epistemology of connection, so that can be meaning one-on-one in the research process, or also connections to broader communities. All the projects have at least these 4 principles: do no harm, respect for everybody involved, focus on dignity for everybody involved, and then building long-term trust. So we don't do research that seeks to do one thing here in one moment. Everything we do imagines that we're going to be working with people for a long time. Okay, why? Why do I do this kind of work? Why do I think it's valuable for the university? Sex trading and trafficking in its community context is a grand challenge. It's a wicked problem. There are not easy solutions. People who trade sex are usually marginalized, stigmatized, harmed, ignored, and silenced. Their experiences are often not seen, and they often don't count. So I think action research is a particularly critical approach to research for problems like this for 4 reasons. One, the action research cycle, with multiple projects building one on the other, digs deeper. Each project surfaces new and deeper questions, which gets us closer and closer to root causes. 2, I think action research helps us overcome some really substantial methodological and ethical challenges in doing research with marginalized populations. And I think it builds trust more broadly in a community context, which helps us work better with people. 3, I think action research, because it's created with people who have expertise in the experience that we're looking at, actually creates information that's more relevant and action ready. And 4, I think it's our responsibility as a land-grant university to partner broadly, illuminate hidden experiences, and surface new knowledge. And I'm going to point to this map, which you probably can't read. So the dots on this map are people who are in Minneapolis Police Department case files for juvenile sex trafficking. The red dots are juvenile victims of sex trafficking, and the black dots are traffickers who were identified by the police. The darker the green, the higher the rate of poverty. So what this map is showing us is that victims of trafficking and traffickers come from the same basic neighborhoods, and those neighborhoods have very high rates of poverty. This is UROC. This is the University of Minnesota, and we're located right there. So we're right in the middle of it. It's our responsibility to work with people in the neighborhoods to solve and work together to solve these problems. Okay.
Thank you. I'm going to offer the thesis that cross-cultural engagement makes for better science. I was trained as a nutrition biochemist and began my faculty appointment here in 1988 with a 75% outreach extension appointment, 25% research. When I began, I inherited a strategy that was outreach, that is delivering, disseminating, or translating research findings to citizens, clients, or customers, regarded as passive recipients of a one-way process. When I visited the communities that you see here, this outreach strategy became problematic, and it was seen as disrespectful. I noticed that reservation communities had a keen interest in healthy foods, but there was little or no participation in our dietetics programs back in the Department of Food Science and Nutrition. Why? Well, in 1990, I didn't have a clue. About 25 years ago, I began to shift my work to community-engaged practice where personal relationships, not academic expertise, became the currency of interaction. Relationships became reciprocal and long-term, going beyond the mere academic transactions. These personal relationships led me to an in-depth exploration of culture and knowledge. Why have we ignored indigenous knowledge systems? The short answer, of course, is they are regarded as unscientific. These personal relationships allowed me to hear some challenging narratives, unlike anything I had heard on campus. I took these comments seriously because I knew the people expressing them as being intelligent, thoughtful individuals. These narratives were not misinformed, but they very much did conflict with what I had been trained to believe, that science done well is of benefit to all in society in a more or less even-handed way. These narratives beg this important question, but it remains one that I have never heard asked, let alone explored, within the nutrition science discipline. We habitually assume our efforts to contribute to well-being will do that, or at worst do no harm. The harm that we impose is virtually invisible within our disciplinary micro-world environments. The figure on the bottom left imposes biomedical understandings of nutrition. The bottom right figure comes from Anishinaabe elders at Lakota Ray in Wisconsin. It teaches their history, their peoplehood, their understandings of how to live a good and healthy life in harmony with all of nature. What happens when our knowledge erases theirs? We must inquire more deeply. Here's my depiction of inquiry with nutrition science. Despite methodological attempts to bracket out socioeconomic and cultural considerations that might interfere with our pursuit of objectivity, hidden subjectivity down at the bottom not only infiltrates, but governs our scientific thought. By hidden, I mean hidden through wide professional acceptance, subjective, highly shared background assumptions, implicit mental models. For example, materialism, reductionism, mechanistic thought, and valuing control over nature are not filtered out by objective, disinterested techniques, but represent subjective orientations that permeate the mental models through which nutrition science inquiry proceeds. Here I mention Stephen Hawking's model-dependent realism. He notes that when a model successfully explains events, we attribute to it the quality of reality. There may be different ways of modeling the same situation. Why not also for food and health relationships, or for other cultural paradigms? Engaging and inhabiting non-biomedical models of food and health offers a different location, a different standpoint from which we can gain greater insight into the hidden subjectivities of nutrition science. So I argue that cross-cultural engagement makes for a better science. And then I close with this difficult question and a quote over 60 years ago from an ethicist that I think we need to take a look at. So thank you very much.
How is everyone? We're halfway through. I'm Carrie Smokoski, and I love this photograph because this photograph is by local photographer Wing Young Hui. And what I love about it is that we have a picture that I think that all of you can look at it and come up with some pretty different stories and narratives about what this young boy is doing, thinking, and feeling dressed in Hmong traditional dress, sitting in the back of a bus. My work focuses on what stories are not told about youth. And what I want to do in 4 minutes is talk about a couple of community engaged projects that I've been involved with or currently involved with. And so one of the things, I'm going to go back. So my work overall critically examines structural inequality in youth spaces, in a variety of youth spaces. And And I actually focus on gender, more specifically masculinity. And so a lot of my scholarship actually involves masculinity practices and performances. My dissertation research, I was actually in the field for 3 years, and that involved ethnographic methods and community engaged research practices. It offered a lot of opportunities to combine these things for depth, richness, and nuance. And those are just a few of the different things that it really offered. I'm going to skip ahead and then I'm going to go back. So what I want to just say is that my current research project that I'm working on now is called Digital Storytelling for Youth Empowerment, and it involves several different partners. And so the partners involved are GWIS, Gender, Women, and Sexuality Studies, UROC, Sprockets of St. Paul, and local public schools. Who all has heard of Sprockets? Oh good, I'm so glad that some people have heard of Sprockets. I think that everybody should know what Sprockets is, but Sprockets is the City of St. Paul's out-of-school type network. Sprockets is an amazing organization, and they're one of our partners, as are the public schools. And one of the things that I also want to stress, these are just different sort of components of community engagement that we're really doing as part of this project. I really want to stress mutual benefit, because I think that mutual benefit is something that we all talk a lot about. It's really actually quite challenging to do, but I think that it's one of the things that we are doing very, very well so far in this project. I want to go back to my other project though, and I want to talk a little bit about the Neighborhood League Men's Soccer, because one of the things that was so wonderful about community engaged practices is that it took almost 2 years to even be able to get on the soccer field with a lot of these guys, and that is due to community engagement. I have to say that it was totally worth the investment in the time, though, to do that, because this is really where young boys shared all of their hopes and dreams and fear and grief and anger and frustrations and tensions, all of those things that I think a lot of us are really scared to hear about from teenage boys. So research on disparity and opportunity with quote-unquote disadvantaged communities often emphasizes prevention techniques. So things like reform, grit and resilience, interventions that are really imbued in these social and cultural deficits. I think those are sort of the traditional models that a lot of us are really familiar with. So for example, we hear a lot about the educational achievement gap. And oftentimes when we hear about the educational achievement gap, it's framed in a way where youth we focus on what youth lack or how youth are the problem, rather than how the institutions they interface with on an everyday basis really need to change. And I really can't stress that enough. Youth voices, a lot of times in these contexts and in these frameworks, really remain unexamined, or they're just missing altogether. What? I don't okay, not yet. Just one more.
Did that on purpose.
Yeah, I know. I just want you. My other side is not on here. That's okay. I will just say it. So what I want to say is that through community engagement, we can use an asset-based lens to view youth and include them as really the most important stakeholders. I mean, that's really, what this is all about. And what I just want to close with is that, this project is we're doing youth participatory action research and digital storytelling, and those things are not new, and many people have done them before us, and many people will do them after us. They're special, but what's really special is the fact that there's all this cross-collegiate work that's happening. It's a collaboration with individuals and organizations from outside of the university who are really coming together as genuine thought partners. And I have to say that this is really rare. I think with, like our group, it may not seem rare, but I think overall when I talk to a lot of people, it's still really rare here. So that's important to remember. Community engagement is essential to these processes and outcomes.
Hi, everyone. It's been very nice to listen to these presentations today. I'm Kevin Murphy. I'm Associate Professor in History, also in American Studies. And I'm going to focus today on incorporating kind of education and pedagogy into community engaged research. So one of the things that I do in my career is I try to break down the distinctions that academics often make between research and teaching and service, which most often includes outreach. And so in all of the activities that I do, I strive to make sure that those separations don't exist. I try to cross them. And I do that in a number of ways. I'll get a little bit of that by focusing on a couple of projects, but again with an emphasis on working with undergraduate and graduate students at the University of Minnesota in carrying through this work. The projects I've been involved in are just some of them that I'm going to talk about today. Twin Cities GLBT Oral History Project, which was a major oral history project and interpretive project that involved interviewing about 100 people who identify as lesbian, gay, bisexual, or transgender, and then interpreting their life stories in collaboration with them in a whole range of ways. Two projects that I've been involved with lately, and as have many students and other faculty at the University of Minnesota, are the Guantanamo Public Memory Project and a project called States of Incarceration that is meant to historicize the current period of mass incarceration in the United States by bringing together 20 different regional histories that are produced at 20 different partner universities across the country. I'm currently teaching 2 classes connected to that project this semester. The last is Twin Cities Neighborhood Histories. So I've done a lot of teaching in public history in courses that focus on particular neighborhoods like Cedar Riverside, and students do projects on those places. I'm interested, obviously, in United States history and in making history very much sort of relevant to the major challenges that we face in the present. All right, so I'm being very literal here and actually answering some of the prompts that were given. How do we educate our students in community-engaged scholarship? I would say, first of all, that you have to do it intentionally and design curriculum at its core that supports this kind of work. It doesn't work as well to just try to have a small unit that focuses on engagement. I think it's much more effective to have engagement sort of permeate a course. The most important thing I would argue, based on my experience, is to teach and model collaboration. To do successful, engaged research always involves collaboration across many different categories of difference. And collaboration has to be at the center of a course that involves engagement. And that collaboration should exist between students, between faculty of students, and between community partners and all of those other individuals. Provide opportunities and connections for community engagements in classes at every level. So it can't just be something that happens at the end of a student's career at the university in a capstone course. It has to be integrated, I think, in order to be effective fully. And so here is just an example from the current project where students are actually reaching out and collaborating with K-12 students, K-12 instructors, to understand how, especially the sort of concentration and other forms of incarceration at historic Fort Snelling are or are not being taught to K-12 students, and the answer is, it is not being taught at all. All right, what processes of scholarship can advance equity and justice? I think engaged projects that actually focus on current problems and challenges, that take seriously the needs and goals and ideals of partners, almost always leads to working toward equity and justice in some form or other. Here in the Guantanamo Public Memory Project, students work with partners to try to bring the issues about sort of security and confinement that we saw at the U.S. Naval Station at Guantanamo, make them relevant locally. Fort Snelling, again, was an example. Their attempt in this digital project was to make connections across those 2 very different sites in a very compelling way, with the goal of tying past episodes of incarceration, of sites of exception to the present day, and making them locally recognizable. How do we make it count for people to do engaged scholarship? We oftentimes focus on faculty and getting credit. When we talk about this question, I'd like to say for students, it's oftentimes an easier problem because The work students do in community-engaged research in classes tends to be much more portable to whatever work they do in the world. Again, I think collaboration here is absolutely important. Collaboration is part of the work people do in the outside world. Our individualized model of writing and teaching does not map onto that world very well. Engaged research teaches all kinds of skills that help students, and oftentimes the kind of work they do can get sort of recognition in the public that helps them go out and do that work in the broader world. Here I point to the Guantanamo Public Memory Project. Again, when we hosted the project here, students that I worked with invited Keith Ellison to a session that focused on local security issues, and then he invited them to bring the project to the US Capitol 2 summers ago, which they did, and they addressed members of Congress, and this was a very sort of transformative and helpful experience for them. So you allow for these possibilities, and then it counts. Finally, creating spaces for community knowledge and community power and community voice. One thing I would say from a teaching perspective is, if you're improvisational and you allow students to do the kinds of projects that they want to do, oftentimes they will reach out and organize events and engage community partners in really surprising ways. Here, when we did a course on near the Cedar Riverside, students organized a neighborhood history gathering at the Brian Coyle Center and collected and shared stories. And those stories helped to inform a play, a musical that the Bedlam Theater put on that was called West Bank Story. So that's just one example of that. Thank you.
So I'm Michele Allen. I'm a family physician and an investigator in the program in health disparities research in the medical school. And my kind of core content work is using community-based participatory research to develop health promotion programming and substance use prevention programming for youth from immigrant communities. And doing that using CBPR for me really means that the definition of that research question starts in partnership with community. We define what the program looks like with community, and then we implement the program together, and then we make sense of the results and share the results back to the community together. So as you've heard from all of the speakers today, there's a lot of potential in that. From those of us who do kind of intervention research, from my perspective, what it does is it creates better programs, they're more relevant, they're more usable and sustainable in communities. So for all the reasons that you've heard today, doing this kind of work is important to develop capacity to do it and to be able to sustain it. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the science of CBPR in that regard today. So one of the questions is, are CBPR researchers born or are they made? And in some research that I did, it's a little bit of both. So really, there's certain attributes that kind of the faculty that responded to our questions about this came up with, really saying that you have to be a person who knows how to share power, who is comfortable being flexible, who really has a social justice orientation, and is kind of willing to work with community on a process that maybe doesn't always fit on our timeline. If you have those attributes, there's a whole lot of institutional factors within our academic institutions that can either facilitate or get in the way of a researcher who wants to do participatory research. And then having a community partner that is a bridging person with the communities that you're working with, who's going to walk on this journey with you, really sort of is what sets up a person to be able to do this kind of work. So, so you get a researcher who's kind of ready to do this kind of work. What are the sort of things that we need in a broader sense to develop these kind of projects? And specifically in my area, looking at addressing health equity. So some of the things that we found is that you need trusted community agencies who are really going to be the agents who are going to sustain this work after a particular research project is gone. You need a flexible community infrastructure that tries to reduce the barriers to doing this kind of work and supports faculty members to do it. And then you need a whole bunch of training around that project and partnership development piece in between, kind of on both sides, for people who've never done this work before, really kind of understanding how do you have group process, how do you work together in a way that you make sure decisions are really shared, how do you deal with some of the nitty-gritty of moving a partnership forward. All of those set up a successful partnership that's going to go ahead and produce those kind of really positive outcomes in the research project that we're looking for. So you've got this great partnership together, they're moving forward. How do you sustain it over the long term? So this is a model that some of my community partners and I developed together that's based on Erik Erikson's stages of individual development. We do adolescent health, so we really think about kind of development a lot. And the metaphor works pretty well. So in infancy, like in infancy for humans, in infancy for partnerships, what you're really trying to do is say, can I trust these other people around me? Do I feel secure when I'm working in them, that they understand my interests and I understand their interests? And do I feel good about what we're doing together? If you don't have those foundational stages, it's very unlikely that the partnership is going to be able to mature. If you try to jump over, because somewhere along the way it's all going to fall apart. So all of that is well and good, but what are the benefits? There's very reasonable research questions and approaches to research that fall all along the spectrum that Kathy and others developed. But for those of us who do CVPR, I think that really what we see is that once you get farther along in that participatory spectrum, what you end up with is a lot of community benefit that you might not see otherwise. Capacity building, you have a platform for community voice that might not have existed before. You have networks and connections and capacities across partner organizations, and that leads to policy and system change as well as research outcomes. And underlying all of this, as one of my community partners says, CVPR is a social justice enterprise. So this is about working with communities in a way that promotes social justice and really redresses some of the inequities that have happened historically.
Is this one on? Yeah. Are we on? Oh, maybe this one.
Can you hear me? Yes. Okay. So I'm obviously vocally challenged today, which I'm going to depend on the microphone. I'm Kathy Jordan. I'm an associate professor of pediatrics and extension, and I've been asked to do a little bit of framing of the issues. I'm going to provide some common language to help us understand the concepts that have run throughout what you've been hearing today by way of these examples. And second, I'm going to try to make a specific point at the end about how faculty members who do community engaged scholarship can succeed in promotion and tenure or career advancement as community engaged scholars. I want to just get a sense of who's in the room. How many of you are students? Excellent. Thank you, Craig Hassel, for bringing your class. How many of you are staff members at the university? Great. How many assistant professors? Associate professors? Full professors? How many of you are involved in the promotion and tenure process as reviewers or P&T committee members? And how many of you are from the community? Thank you for being here. All right. So, as we've heard Michele talk about and Andy Furco talked a little bit about, community engagement is the application of institutional resources to address and solve challenges that are facing communities through direct partnership and collaboration with those communities. So doing to is never ethical, but doing for, in, and with follow along a continuum, much like Michele had talked about, with various ways of engaging with communities. And it's really the doing with that signifies that deep, authentic partnership that Andy Furco talked about in particular, but Michele also talked about as well. So far we've talked about community engagement, but we haven't talked about the scholarship part in the term community engaged scholarship. So this is the traditional definition of scholarship by Diamond et al. It's an activity that requires a high level of expertise from your discipline. It's something that should break new ground or at least be somewhat innovative and not just repeat what we've already known. It has significance or impact. It can be replicated and elaborated because it's done with rigor and replicability. And the work and its results can be documented and disseminated and subjected to peer review. And it's really those last two, the documented, disseminated, and subjected to peer review, are really the cornerstones of what we define as scholarship. So if we combine all of that and we think about, okay, community engaged scholarship, this is a definition by the Commission on Community Engaged Scholarship in the Health Professions that defines community engaged scholarship as excuse me, the scholarship that involves the academic in a mutually beneficial partnership with community. It can be transdisciplinary and often integrates some combination of multiple forms of scholarship. So, career advancement or promotion and tenure for faculty members can pose some challenges to community engaged scholars. And one of the most important ones is the fact that faculty under a lot of pressure to produce scholarship. It's important to understand what's the difference between a scholarly approach and scholarship. And so I'm going to take this example here. This is a laser pointer, correct?
Yes.
How does that work?
Green button.
The green button. Thank you. So if we start here where it says start, and we think about going around this way, this is sort of the cycle of developing curriculum. Take an educational example. So we look at, here's a problem, what have others done to talk about or teach about this? We select a method that we want to use. We have a rationale for doing that. We try it out and we observe results. This is an evaluative sort of process. We get feedback. Sorry. I'm all over the place. We make adjustments if necessary based on that feedback. We try it again and we get more feedback. And eventually, after we've gone around this circle, we have developed something that is within our repertoire. And that's a scholarly approach. It's something that's data-driven. It's something that's based on what's come before and knowledge of what's happened before us. It's based on evaluation and trying new things, figuring out what works and what doesn't work. But it actually hasn't produced scholarship until it comes into this middle circle here. And this is the idea that you're documenting something from that process that can be put out into the world, broadly disseminated and peer-reviewed. Sometimes people think of that as just being a peer-reviewed journal article, and I would argue that we need to think more broadly, because in community-engaged scholarship, academic and community partners often produce things that are not intended for academic audiences. They're intended for community audiences to really try to make impact in the community. So they take the form of innovative products of community-engaged scholarships. Might be documentaries or curricula or websites or toolkits. And I'd like to argue that those things are as important as the peer-reviewed journal article in community-engaged scholarship, because we really have two audiences, our academic peers and our community peers as well. And I also want to argue that we often talk about the challenge of community-engaged scholarship as being one of time. It's a very time-intensive process, but we can't really use that as an excuse for not producing the scholarship that is necessary in career advancement, because community engagement actually offers a ton of fodder for producing community engaged scholarship. We don't need to wait until the very end of a project in order to get a publication or some sort of dissemination mechanism out there about the results. There's lots of things that we can document along the way, and we can also produce these innovative products of community engaged scholarship. And therefore, community engaged scholarship is actually a very rich form of producing scholarly productivity. And I will stop there. Thank you.
So what an amazing array of examples of engaged scholars who are coming from different fields and addressing different public issues in different ways. And you probably heard just some of the themes that occurred to me: an asset-focused approach to communities as well as ourselves, relationships as absolutely central and requiring time and trust, real collaboration at every stage of the scholarly process. What other examples or themes emerged for you all? And I'm going to invite, while you think, invite the speakers to roll your chairs around for this discussion portion. Sorry, we'll make it hard for you to film. But what else struck you from there? Yep.
I think one of the things that struck me was I think several people referred to the way that the academy kind of structures knowledge and scholarship in certain disciplines, whereas the community has a whole different way of structuring. And so we always are challenged, as you all know, in working interdisciplinarily and so forth. So I'd love to hear comments about that.
One of the ideas, I was part of the group that pitched the whole idea of grand challenges for the strategic plan of the university, and I don't know if it'll go this far, but part of that conversation that we had with the strategic planning committee was essentially reorganizing the university around these challenges, not just sort of dabbling in them, mentioning them in classes, but what would it take to actually reorganize the institution around problem sets rather than around disciplines. The disciplines would remain, but the disciplines would feed and inform the problem set rather than the way we work now.
I'll just add, it's one of my projects is I'm working with partners in the College of Education and Human Development on a school-based program, and it's challenging, but it's very rich. I mean, we find that our languages, even though we both are about youth and working for and with youth, the language that we use to describe our work and to describe how we think about the problems we're addressing are very, very, very different. So it really is uncovering acronyms and really kind of, it's a whole other participatory process and really trying to make sure that we're on the same page, as well as on the same page as our community partners. So.
Other things either you noticed or that you have questions about? Yeah.
Well, everybody talked about the importance of partnerships, and Michele talked about, this path to building sustaining partnerships. How do you learn that? How did you learn to do that? How do you teach your students to do that? How do you find a partner?
Well, I think so. The project that I showed that kind of complicated model from was one where we were really evaluating, could we kind of build and support partnerships from scratch, and would they work? And we found that, yes, they did work in a lot of cases, but they didn't in some cases. And the cases where they didn't, I think, were the problem was mostly on the academic side. So I really do think that people have to come to this work with a openness, or have those kind of personal attributes, or an openness to learn about them. And then I think a lot of the rest of it can be trained. People can learn how really group process is kind of a skill, and if you have that orientation, you can learn those skills, and that's kind of the foundation of what makes partnerships work, is knowing how to do that. But you have to have that kind of initial orientation, and that kind of, I think, non-hierarchical approach to how you do your work.
I'm going to build on that, because I think from my work, one of the things that that I've learned, you have to be, I've had to learn how to be okay with being yelled at, being wrong, being challenged at every level. Like, who are you and why are you here? What's your point? What's your value? You know, so I've had to really, and I don't know if other people have experienced that too, but I think being okay, it's never fun to be yelled at, but figuring out how to sit in a space where everything you've been taught is being challenged. So being, you know, trained as my background in anthropology, as a pretty theoretical, historical anthropologist, trying to do this work with real living human beings, and, you know, learning that so much of what I've learned about how my discipline and how the academy functions, people in the real world actually experience as harmful. You know, this idea that you could objectify something, you know, the whole scientific method, people experience that as inherently harmful to their psyche, especially the people that I work with who've been involved in sex trading or sex trafficking, many of whom are marginalized in lots of different ways, who've been studied. You know, one thing that I learned in my work, many of the people that I work with had been involved in loads of research projects. They've donated plasma. They've done all kinds of intersection and interaction with universities that have just felt really extractive, and not valuing them as human beings. That's why, for me, this idea of connection, and how do you develop an authentic connection between myself as a human being and the people that I'm co-constructing research with, became super important. And the way I did that, to get to your question, I actually started a meditation practice and figured out how do I be present and how do I work on non-judgment in the moment, how do I breathe and just be present for and with the people that I'm co-constructing research with. So that was a super useful skill for me, which, you know, I probably need to go back to. Sometimes I forget to do meditation.
If I could add to that, is it okay if I go?
Yeah, go ahead.
Just on the, it's interesting what Lauren's saying, because I think from teaching around community engagement and teaching around partnerships, you realize, I realized quickly, I have to essentially work against all of the training and socialization, a lot of the training and socialization that students have had so far, and then I realized by extension my own training and investments. And one of them is about this pride and about in being right all the time, right? Because that's a disaster, right? That does not work. You have to actually learn how to take pleasure in being wrong, right? To understand that as an opportunity to learn more, to be interested in being wrong. And students, and in teaching, that means working against the grading system, right? Because the grading system, traditional grading system, actually gets in the way of helping to form collaborative relationships and partnerships. Because everybody, if you want to get the A, you're not focused on the project, on what your own investments are in the project that extend beyond the classroom. So interestingly, in some ways, you have to assure students that if they invest themselves and attach to the project and want to make it meaningful and invest in it, that they don't have to worry about the grade, right? In the same way they would otherwise. And that's hard to do. But also, you know, all of the things around privilege too. It's really important to work against people's own sense of privilege and to try to bring to bear usually community-based knowledge about privilege, including privilege of whiteness, cisgender, other kinds of categories, and that gets incorporated into the classroom and also I think helps people who are instructing too.
So, go ahead.
I was going to say I do a lot of work around the wild rice issue between the university and the Anishinaabe communities, and there's a very, very negative, mistrustful history there. And it's very important to understand history when you step into community spaces and to understand what the community experience is like and to recognize the integrity of that understanding from the community perspective. There's also, I found it to be very important to have to, as a member of the institution of the university, I have to accept responsibility for the university's past behavior, even if I'm trying to transform it and don't believe in what's happened. So for example, I was up with a group of elders at White Earth trying to help them create a nutrition symbol in a very community engaged way. An elder looked at me and she said, "Are you from the university?" And I said, "Yes, I am." And she said, "What are you doing with our rice?" Because it was my college that was doing genomic mapping at the time. And I had to accept responsibility for that. I said, well, we aren't behaving very well. So I had to own that rather than run away from it. It's easier for us to see ourselves as individuals that are not a part of something that we don't like, but yet we have to step into and own that space.
Just on a related note to what Greg's talking about, in my early partnership work, I always cringed a little bit when people would say, "Oh, the university is here," and they would look at me. And I realized, oh, I am this representative of this monolithic institution. And I had to prevent myself from saying, no, I'm not the university, I'm just me. And realize that I needed to accept responsibility for coming from the university and to own that and not run away from that. And I sort of now have a rule that I don't sort of stop owning that until the community members stop saying the university. When they start calling me by my first name instead of, you're the university, then I know that I'm being treated more as an individual and it's okay for me to behave in that way. But until then, I have to own that university representation.
And yet at the same time, I think a lot of people perceive us as this big black box. And frequently, community members are eager to find actually a real human being that they can talk to rather than the university.
So one question I wondered about, like Carrie mentioned, engaged scholarship is rare, even though it doesn't appear to be while we're sitting in this room together. And yet the university has declared, and it's very countercultural, right? The work is going against all the widespread disciplinary, the accepted assumptions of what objectivity is that you mentioned, Craig. Like you all sort of addressed ways in which this is countercultural in a research university. And yet the university has declared its intention, as Jennifer read to all of us, to create an engagement culture. What would you hope that, say, in 5 years, like what's a step? You mentioned institutional factors, right, Michele, in addition to the personal traits that people bring. Like, what could you imagine being a positive step for the university? What would you and your colleagues benefit from as you seek to make this less rare in the University of Minnesota?
I have two thoughts about that, and then others can answer. I think that some of the challenges institutionally are how we define the word impact and how we define the word scholarship. So impact in promotion and tenure is all about impact factors, how many people read the journal that you published in. And in community engaged scholarship, we know that impact on communities is at least as important as the impact factor score of a journal. And then the definition of scholarship as the peer-reviewed journal article about an original research project is another thing that I think we need to change and think about these more innovative forms of scholarship that often arise when community academic members work together. And if we can change the definitions of those two things, I think we'll begin to shift the institutional culture towards acknowledging and rewarding and respecting this sort of work. I'm disturbed in my own college, in my own department, that this sort of work seems to be okay for faculty members who are not on the tenure track, who are on a research or teaching track. The tenure guidelines explicitly say that this kind of work is encouraged, and these innovative products of community engaged scholarship that are not journal articles are encouraged and accepted. That language is not written in the tenure guidelines for the tenure track, and I think that's problematic.
One thing I would just say as a sort of blanket statement is that I think in order to really have this kind of culture, the university cannot be run like a corporation. So by that I mean the kind of qualities we were talking about, where you have to admit when you're wrong, you have to really commit to engagement, and partnership means that it can't just be for PR purposes, that things like, if the university is called on things about its impact on local communities, it needs to respond in serious ways to those and actually redirect itself when that's the right thing to do, and that PR people cannot be advising our leaders when they're called to account, and that can't be the first filter through which these kinds of engagements are worked out, and that so sort of decorporatization, I think, is absolutely essential in order to really have a commitment to public engagement.
I was going to say, I think relaxing our attachment to rankings and external assessments of excellence is very important, because we are situated in a very unique context, particularly when we talk about comprehensive land-grant universities. And I think one thing that has become clear for me is the very expansive field of possibilities that opens up when communities and academics work together, and that there's working across different knowledge systems brings different perspectives. This wide field of possibilities is there for us to step into and bring leadership to as an institution. And that can't happen so long as we're looking over our shoulder at rankings and standards that come from our history.
If I could speak from more of the sort of recent, graduate student perspective, I guess. I think that it's important to look at things like timely progress in terms of what we're talking about right now. Timely progress when you're a doctoral student at the University of Minnesota is pretty much like, like from the day that you enter your program, you are hearing about timely progress. I think that it's good for graduate students not to be graduate students forever and to not, sort of languish for long periods of time. But I think that we need to really rethink what timely progress means when it comes to projects like this. I think that you can do, I'm a perfect example of this. I think you can do a really strong quality, scholarly, project that is community engaged, that has these community engaged research practices. But there has to be people that are going to really be able to sort of come together and think through in more like in an institutionalized way to say, what does timely progress really mean for doctoral students who want to do these projects? Because I knew PhD students who really did actually want to do projects like this, but they could not wrap their heads around how they were going to do it and finish their coursework in 3 years, get a dissertation out in a year or two. It just didn't, and they may not have had the support of someone who could sit down and help them kind of think through those things. So, I'm sort of as more of a recent graduate student, I just really want people to start thinking through timely progress, because when we talked about dissemination and the differences in how we disseminate work, that can happen. As a doctoral student, like you can be disseminating work and show that you have benchmarks of scholarship and timely progress. But again, it's a rethinking. It's a rethinking.
Yeah, this is a perfect segue. I'd like to reinforce Kara's point about timely progress and connect it to Craig's point about the metrics that we're holding ourselves to. And the particular one I'd like to point to is the timely progress issue as applied to undergraduates with the graduation rate. And I don't remember how long ago it was, but I came here in 1979, and for much of the time that I was here, we did not refer to the class of whatever. And now we do, and it's horrible. It sets up more than half our undergraduates to feel like failures. And it squanders the resources that students potentially bring. So the students who can get involved in community engaged projects are not just students who need to learn to enter into communities that are strange to them and have to learn about their privilege. They're students who come from all these diverse communities. They're students who provide knowledge and connection and bridges and ways of building trust. And if they're drawing on that, and if we value them from that, if they're going to help transform us because of what they bring, they're probably not going to graduate in 4 years. And we need to recognize that, and we need to have that be one of the strengths of this university. We need to stop referring to the class of 20 whatever and trying to, which is a way, along with the 13 credit, and then you get the more for free, and all that we drove away adult students. We're doing everything in our power to detach students from the communities from which they come. We're trying to make them ignorant of the knowledge that they could bring. We're trying to grab all of their time so that they can't go home again and can't maintain those connections. We're trying as hard as we can to squander the resource that our students bring to us. We have to stop doing that.
Another oh, was there? No. So one of the other questions that occurred to me, that there's clearly major institutional change that would contribute to greater engaged scholarship. Several of you have also talked about lessons you've learned and skills you've developed in doing engaged scholarship. So I would invite more of you to share a little bit about, when we think about building on assets, are there particular assets that you've discovered either in yourselves or in the communities and the partners with which you're working that you didn't know existed before or just hadn't thought about in that way, or even maybe shifted, where there was something you had interpreted as a deficit that you shifted and realized actually this is an asset? I'm just curious for more examples of.
Well, I mean, for example, sometimes the problem that the community comes to you with isn't the problem. I mean, we did this project with Hennepin County. The juvenile detention center was having a lot of fights in the waiting rooms, and they came to us to sort of solve the problem of fights in the waiting rooms. Well, it turns out nobody had ever asked anybody why they were fighting. And so we just did a lot of observation, actually talked to the people, including a lot of the youth, and what we discovered is they were fighting because they were caught in a completely dysfunctional system. And so instead of solving the waiting rooms and blaming the waiting rooms, we diagrammed their dysfunctional system, and everybody who had gone through it helped us do that diagram. They knew exactly where the dysfunctions were, and that's what we presented to the county. And the county was really angry at us because we didn't solve, they thought we didn't do what we were told, right? But then about 6 months later, they called us up and they realized we were right. And since then, we've just been one after another of these things with Hennepin County to help them sort of rethink their systems by actually talking to the stakeholders who are affected by it.
Right. So the people's behavior wasn't the problem.
Yeah.
They had the knowledge.
They have the knowledge. It's the people that, ask them and help them co-create a better system.
Great.
So that's.
A question in the back, Julie.
Could I just add this onto your questions?
Yeah.
As you think about these examples, I would like to also hear, many of you discussed how you came to do this work, but how you convinced your colleagues to be comfortable doing this work as well. I mean,
yeah, right. If you've had success, right. And maybe if you haven't had success, would you be interested in what?
Because I thought many of you captured nicely the anxieties that we recognize in this work, but I feel like you had tools that worked well for you. Have you been able to share those?
Well, it's not so hard to share the tools, but everyone that I've talked to, and I've worked in my department for many years trying to share what I'm doing, and it's sort of been an evolution where, quite honestly, I was summoned by my dean with my department head about 15 years ago, and it was suggested that I take counseling. So there are a lot of forces for the status quo, and everyone is very keenly connected to those and understand those, and so what I've found is I try to be an example. I try to live the work and do the work. I'm still here. And so that in itself, I think, gets people to think. But I also think there's a shift in consciousness across society, that people are more aware that there may be something here. There may be something to this. And I think over time, I don't know that this conversation, this panel would have been possible 10 years ago. So we are making progress. It's just that it's very, very difficult to see that switch or transformation. I'm never sure exactly where people are or how I might have affected their path or their thinking. But I am very confident that there is this very broad consciousness shift, and that over time more people will come into this work.
And thank you. Many people have, partly because of what you and many of you have done.
I would say, I'll say too, that collaboration again is really important here, and not just the act of collaborating, but collaborating in a way that works against the disincentives for doing this kind of work that are built in the institution. So with colleagues who are faculty, maybe sort of co-teaching and having the opportunity to work together on a project, and with students, identifying resources for them to do this work, scholarships, TA-ships, to build all of that. And one of the things that a group of us are doing nationally with a thing called Humanities Action Lab, we actually have collaboration across 20 universities, so that we work together to produce the archives for the projects that we're doing, and then work together to produce curriculum and syllabi that we all can then use and share. So that makes it, because it can be very individually very alienating, and then also can seem to work against your other career objectives, and that collaborating in all those ways can respond to that.
I'd like to sort of build on that. I think sometimes community-engaged scholars are perhaps thought of as doing work that is softer than their peers, or other myths is that this work is purely qualitative or only in the realm of social science or something like that. Somehow the skills of the community-engaged scholar aren't quite up to snuff, or aren't like their peers who don't do this sort of work. So what I do is I talk about something I call the second set of skills, which means that the community-engaged scholar needs to know and do all the things that a traditional scholar knows how to do, but then they also need to be able to collaborate. They also need to be able to communicate with diverse audiences. They need to be able to write completely differently than you do in an academic publication. And there are others. And so my point is, it's not less than, it's actually more than, because that community-engaged scholar is the scholar first, and then they're adding the community engagement skills and communication and collaboration on top of that. And that's worthy of a lot of respect, because it's really hard to be able to both balance all the things you know from your disciplinary rigor background with all of the things you know about community need and engagement and communication, and to do both of them well is a really special set of skills.
Yeah, I agree with that, Kathy. I actually think it's why a lot of our colleagues don't do it. This is really hard work. It's just easier to not do it.
I think that's true, and I think that there's a little bit of a fear factor too when you talk about sharing power, working in this real collaborative way. The thing that in my mind kind of separates those people that that have those attributes versus those that don't is, are you comfortable having a total open budget on your grant? So even my colleagues who are sort of collaborative, there's always there's that line that they're nervous about crossing. I have to be the one in charge of the budget, and so that there is a little bit of that fear that what will happen if I open this up entirely. So getting people kind of over that hump, I think, is kind of what can make or break whether they want to really do this work.
I want to add something that's a little different. So I'm kind of a weird case because I'm not tenure faculty, I'm a research associate. And there are a lot of research associates at the University of Minnesota who do this kind of work, who aren't in the normal stream of academic recognition. And I think a lot of times the work of research associates is less recognized than the work of other people on campus. And now I chose that path because I started my research actually working for a community organization, and then I was brought to the university to do engagement for someone else. I didn't realize that that's what was happening when I was originally brought, but it turned out they wanted somebody who could do their engagement. Obviously that doesn't work. You can't hire somebody to do your engagement for you. The whole point of it is that you yourself, as a researcher, have to learn how to navigate and manage and collaborate and build these things. So in some ways, the research associate path, there is way more freedom. So I don't have to worry about tenure track. I don't have to worry about the metrics as much. On the other hand, I have less security. So there's security or freedom. You know. But there are spaces at the university where research associates can find pathways to do this kind of work and also do teaching and do all the other stuff too. So I just wanted to make a plug for that as an alternative path that can still have quite a bit of impact within the university. And I've been really lucky, obviously, to end up at UROC and in spaces where engagement is kind of in the air.
So maybe that's an important point, one final, unless there's anything burning from any of you, one final quick question for all of you. You can go along the arc. Just in a few words, given that the work is hard, not always supported actively by your colleagues or the institution, what sustains you in this work? And if you want to skip, you can. Everyone's like, I'm just going. Sorry, just go. Not to put you on.
Well, it's going to sound so cliche, but it really is true. It's really the partnerships. I mean, I do agree that this is really hard work and there are extra challenges. But I have to say, and maybe this makes me odd, I actually think that in many ways, it's just so much more enjoyable. I mean, it's just so enjoyable to have this level of collegiality, to be able to work with people that you really, really share some of the same values with. I just wouldn't want it any other way. So, no, I love this.
Ditto. So much more enjoyable, and I think more, for me, ultimately much more rewarding. My career is much better for it.
Same thing. It's fun. It's fun. I love my community partners and his colleagues, and yeah, it's fun.
I think we often go into graduate school with a passion, and graduate school can socialize the passion out of you. And I think this work allows you to rekindle that passion in a way that really is sustaining and fulfilling.
My relationships with community have allowed me to regain a fuller sense of my own humanity.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree. The relationships I've formed in my work have totally transformed who I am and how I see myself in the world. I don't think that it's fun all the time, but I think the relationships are what keep me going.
And for me, I just learn a tremendous amount from communities and constantly learning how my discipline is connected to everything else, which is great.
So thank you all for sharing that wisdom with us today.